WNST Tacos before they take it on to the road to Washington on Thursday and off to Yankee Stadium and then off to Comiskey next week in Chicago. But a weekend with the Boston Red Sox that was very, very up and down, Luke Jones. They get off to the great start. You knew they were going to see the two bookend back-to-back good starters on Saturday and Sunday and really couldn't do much with it in the end. And, weird way to sort of give the game away on Sunday on a wild pitch. And then I guess we're going to talk about Jimenez and David Price and all that stuff on Saturday as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, you just said it, an up-and-down series. I mean, let's face it, and let's be very clear about this. A week ago at this time, we were wondering if this team was completely circling the drain. And if you had said then that they would go 4-3 against the Yankees and the Red Sox, you'd take that. You wouldn't be doing cartwheels about it, but you'd say, okay, it could be way worse the way they had been playing. But when you consider they'd taken 2 out of 3 from the Yankees, they take the first 2 from the Red Sox, you're thinking, I don't think anyone was unrealistic to have visions of a 4-game sweep, knowing that David Price was going Saturday night and then Chris Sale in the finale. But
we did talk about it on Saturday before the game.
right. Well, but you're at least thinking, man, great opportunity to win a series. Take 3 out of 4. Get yourself where you're ahead of Boston in second place. I mean, you're still within striking distance of the Yankees. I mean, they're not, they didn't have a tremendous weekend by any means playing Toronto. And what ended up happening, you just said it wasn't shocking. David Price, to his credit, and bad news for the rest of the AL East, but good news for the Red Sox, he's back, and he looked very much like David Price. In fact, velocity up a little bit from where it was last year. Maybe not the guy he was, the flamethrower that he was quite when he was, say, 25, but looked like David Price. And then on Sunday, really the Orioles were fortunate to score 3 runs in the first inning. Chris Sale deep counts wasn't sharp, but more so about Pablo Sandoval, just abysmal defense at third base. I mean, he whiffs on Rickard trying to steal third. It was a dead duck. He completely whiffed on that, and then he throws the ball away. And the Orioles, to their credit, they made him pay. That you get an extra out, you better take advantage of that, and they were able to do that. But after that, Chris Sale settled in. Chris Tillman, better than we'd seen the last couple starts, but still not where he needs to be very clearly. And it adds up to, you factor all that in with Francisco Pena throwing the ball away in the 6th inning, a critical spot, an 0-2 pitch. You're trying to get out of a bases-loaded jam. Looks like Tillman's going to do it.
And you got your Sunday catcher in, right? I mean, that's pretty much what this is, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Pena's a solid defensive catcher. I mean, look, from my vantage point in the press box, he absolutely had a shot to throw him out, but it's a case where you've got to make sure you have and he acknowledged he didn't have a great throwing lane. You have to have that throwing lane because it's not a do or die play to make, meaning if you don't get him out, just don't throw the ball away because you're still up 1-2 at that point, and you still got a chance. It's a number 9 hitter at the plate. So just really, really disappointing to see that. And what's crazy about it is Pena made a hell of a stop. I mean, Tillman absolutely spiked that pitch. I mean, that was a 55-foot changeup that he just threw into the ground. Somehow Pena blocks it and has a great chance to pick off the runner at third and throws it away. I mean, it's something you can't do when you're in a close game against Chris Sale. And the one thing I will say, not because Pena's error was clearly the story of the game. The Orioles, they limited Sale to 6 innings. They got the 3 runs in the first inning. They didn't get no more offense after that. And when you factor in that Craig Kimbrell, who threw so many pitches on Saturday night, he was unavailable. Even facing Sale, they still had 9 more outs to work with after that, and they couldn't scratch together any offense. I mean, it's just you look at the last 2 games of this series, and I understand it's David Price, I understand it's Chris Sale, but you score 5 runs total over those 2 games, you're probably not going to win unless you're getting terrific pitching performances. And we saw Dylan Bundy have a grinded-out, mediocre outing on Saturday, which, hey, the kid's been terrific. He's going to have some of those from time to time, especially against a good lineup. And then Chris Tillman, pretty bad early on, settled in and was pretty good in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th inning, and then reverted to the Tillman that we've been seeing too much, walking guys, deep counts, not able to put hitters away. overall, his velocity was a little bit better. I saw some flashes that I was encouraged by, but pretty clear Chris Tillman still has a long way to go to inspire confidence that he's going to be the guy that he's been in the past. But you take you have a 4-game split. It could have been worse, but certainly after those first 2 games, could have been a whole lot better too.
All right, so step up onto your Ubaldo Jimenez soapbox here for me, Luke Jones, and some thoughts about the fallout of that.
Well, I mean, it comes down to this, and fans were going nuts, completely crushing Buck Showalter. And look, I'm not going to say that I like the move to pitch Ubaldo Jimenez in a 2-1 game in the 8th inning. For what it's worth, after the game, Buck said that Mike Wright and Michael Givens were unavailable. He was only going to use Darren O'Day and Brad Brock if it was tied or they had a lead. And as much as if you want to disagree with that philosophy, that's fine, but it's nothing new. I mean, you can even go back to when they had a healthy Zach Britton. And you can go find some games last year.
Well, dude has a uniform on his back, and he's getting paid, and, he's there, and if he's your best option, if you're Buck, and Buck feels like he's the best option, you put him in there, then he's got to do the job. I mean, he just doesn't do the job. That's the bottom line, right?
Well, he's not their best option, but it comes down to this. You know as well as anyone else, you can't manage this game like the American League Wild. Wait, that might be a bad example,
oh, right,
actually.
Exactly, yeah.
You can't manage this game like the 7th game of the World Series where, you like what I did there? I did that on purpose.
I'm aware. I'm sharp, Luke. I mean, I know it's getting late in my career, but I'm still sharp on that.
Yeah. But the reality is this. You cannot afford to have anyone in your bullpen that is strictly going to pitch and mop up duty. It just isn't going to work. The Orioles just had a 6-man bullpen a few weeks ago, and how did that work out? We saw it. It doesn't work. Maybe, just maybe, if you had Zach Britton and everyone else in the bullpen was rested, not overworked, if you had a starting rotation that was consistently night in, night out, usually getting you through at least 6 innings, getting you into the 7th inning, then maybe you could stomach that. And we saw in 2014, we saw for a very brief time last year, when obviously the bullpen was in a much better state than it is now, that they were able to sustain having Jimenez in the bullpen. But it just doesn't work. I mean, think about this. A few weeks ago, we saw Vidal Nuno having to pitch in the 8th inning of a tie game. We've seen Stephon Crichton have to pitch in some close games. I mean,
Blyer was a guy you didn't really trust a month and a half ago. He's now like part of the furniture. They go to him.
He's done a nice job. I mean, we've seen Alec Asher, obviously, who's now in the rotation. But my point is, with the starting rotation that they have, and with the bullpen that they have right now without Zach Britton, and really having 3 guys that you trust and feel really good about, and that's obviously Brock, O'Day, and Givens. And as you mentioned, Blyer coming on. Asher has been good in the pen when he's been there. Of course, he's in the rotation right now. You cannot have a long reliever who, 1, does not have minor league options, and 2, that you can't even trust to pitch in some close games when you're trailing, as was the case on Saturday night. I mean, because if you don't do that, you're back to having a short bullpen again. And we saw what happened there. Guys were overworked. Brock wasn't effective. O'Day had a tired shoulder. Givens got into a rut there. I mean, it doesn't work. Because if you're going to have someone in the bullpen, you got to be able to use them in at least some semi-meaningful situations from time to time. That's not to say that Jimenez is going to come in a save situation, or that he's going to do that often, or he's going to come pitch the 7th inning when you're up by 2 runs. But we've seen this. Buck, there's a method to the madness. Wild card game last year notwithstanding, that he's going to pump the brakes a little bit on using his best guys, and he's going to save his best guys to be fresh when they have leads. And part of it, besides Jimenez just not being a good fit in the bullpen, and we talked about this when we were debating when he was going to be removed from the rotation, why we said that it's not tenable for him to be in the bullpen. But the other factor, and this is something that people aren't going to hear, but if you're just looking at win probability and just how realistic you're being, it was they were in the top of the 8th inning at that point. They knew that Craig Kimbrell was rested and was going to be called upon at the very latest, the start of the 9th inning. So even from that standpoint, you're already down by a run. You know Craig Kimbrell's looming in. You have 3 outs to work with. You know, is it your best call to burn through your best reliever there, and still might lose a game by 1, and then you don't have that guy for Sunday? And I guess you could make the argument and say, well, Chris Sale was going on Sunday, and you'd be right in saying that now.
Well, you want to win on Saturday night. You feel like you had a better chance of winning being where you are in the 6th, 7th inning of that game, right?
Right. But the point, I mean, it comes down to the big issue here. And look, any manager, even the best managers, there are going to be bullpen decisions that are made that you're not going to agree with and that you can second guess. That's the nature of the beast. Earl Weaver, if he had managed in a time where bullpen usage was as prevalent as it is today, would have been plenty of instances where people would question. Joe Madden gets questioned all the time. Go through any of the top managers in the game that people consider to be the best. You can second guess. That's part of the job. That's part of the territory. That's part of a 162-game sample day in and day out where we don't know what the health is of certain pitchers, stamina, all kinds of different issues that we're never made aware of. But it comes down to, with Jimenez, you can't have someone in your bullpen that you are only going to use in blowouts where you're winning by a lot or losing by a lot, unless magically you're going to have a lot of blowouts. And what have we seen from this team really over the last few years? They play a lot of close games. So it's not tenable. And as much as people want to beat out Buck, if you want to beat up Buck, have at it. I'm not.
Well, are you just saying he's not a major league pitcher at this point and shouldn't be on the team?
Basically, it comes down to this. Look, are you telling me that it's not possible that Jimenez could get on a roll at some point? Yeah, he could. We've seen that. We saw it last year over the final 5 weeks of the season. But as I always said to you, how many games did they potentially cost themselves in the process waiting to get to that point? They had a guy with a 7 ERA in the rotation through, July? I mean, it just comes down to it. It's nothing personal. Ubaldo wants to do well. There's no doubt about that. He's a team guy. He's always done whatever they've asked, but he just doesn't get the job done. And I understood it 2 years ago. I understood it to an extent last year, but you're at a point where he's going to be paid this money one way or the other. He's not paid through, his contract runs through this year and that's it, finally. I mean, a sunk cost is a sunk cost, and I wouldn't put it past Buck Showalter here, and I haven't heard this from him. I'm not saying that it's absolute, but I wouldn't be shocked if part of him using Jimenez in the 8th inning there, in addition to wanting to keep his best arms rested and wanting to keep those guys fresh and to live to fight another day, I wouldn't be stunned if there wasn't a little bit of a message there to management. Dan Duquette, who of course signed Ubaldo Jimenez, and even ownership. With Peter Angelos, if he's willing to eat the money, which we've seen sometimes they have been, like Bud Norris a couple years ago, and other times they haven't been, because Jimenez is still on this roster at this point.
Well, it's about eating how much money. Eating a couple million, fine. Eating 11 million, 14 million, no. I mean, and that would play right into the personality of the old man. I mean, there's no doubt about that. As I'm resurrecting the Peter principles here this week and reading the way the place was always managed until everything went silent there 10 years ago when he threw people like me out of there from asking questions, it's certainly, you can speculate, I'll tell you that much, and you wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah, but on this one specifically, I'll throw Dan Duquette in there as well, because keep in mind, this was Duquette's, other than re-signing Adam Jones in 2012, this was Duquette's first big money signing with the Orioles. I mean, it's just, first couple years there was some smaller deals. Wei-In Chen was a signing that worked out well, even though the Orioles had scouted him before Duquette arrived. He finished it off, obviously, but
But they didn't give him $50 million. In the end, they didn't give him the money, right?
Right, but Jimenez was, that was his big signing. That was his pitching acquisition. They signed Nelson Cruz also that spring, but remember, that was just the one-year pillow contract. So I think there is, I wouldn't at all be surprised if there's a little bit of a little message being sent there to say, hey, we won't get rid of this guy. We took him out of the rotation. That's fine, but you know how I operate a bullpen. I can't have a dead spot there. It's just not going to work. And there's no
because
end
the
game
game's
here.
going on. I mean, you got to play the game. I mean, somebody's got to come out of the bullpen.
So it just comes down to they've already played the whole 6-man bullpen thing, and we saw how that worked out. You can't do that again. So, it comes down to, and let's not forget, they only scored 2 runs on Saturday night as well. So, it's easy to blame Buck Showalter. If you want to, have at it. I'm not going to argue, but the circumstances and the big picture issue at work there is Ubaldo Jimenez being in the bullpen is not tenable, especially when you're waiting for Zach Britton to return, and clearly this bullpen not being at full strength as it is.
Well, the offense, now we're done with Jimenez and the pitching, and, Bundy with an okay start, Asher with a pretty good start. We sort of rate these things A, B, C, D, E, or, 1 to 10, how we're going to rate them on a day-by-day basis. The hitting really is the problem for the most part. The hitting is underperformed. There have been times when the pitching's been, quite frankly, a little better than I thought it would be in the starting rotation, and certainly not as good in the bullpen, and it's not going to be with Britton not there and O'Day scuffling the way he did earlier. But the hitting side of this, I'm waiting for that week when it all sort of comes together, and I haven't felt that at all. Even when they were winning games back in April and in early May, it was sort of scuffling by to get a run here or there, a couple of key hits, but it wasn't anything that sort of blew you away offensively.
Yeah, well, you've heard me say this to you on a few occasions. As if we're going to talk relative to expectations, and you have to do that. We know what this team was constructed to do. I've been just as disappointed in the offense as the pitching. If you had told me we'd be sitting here back in February, that we'd be sitting here in June talking about the starting rotation, I'd be, shocking, big. Of course we were. We knew that. If you had told me that Zach Britton was going to miss most of the first 2 months of the season, I'd say, yeah, I'm guessing the bullpen hasn't been terrible, but hasn't been as good, and I'd be right. So you look at the offense, and it hasn't been awful, but it's been very ordinary. I think that's probably the best way to put it. And you look at where they stand with most of their numbers. They did hit 4 home runs on Thursday night. It was good to see that. Clearly weather warming up in Baltimore. We saw that at the beginning of this series. It was good to see Machado get going a bit over the weekend. Had a good game Sunday, hit that monster home run into the second deck on Friday night. Just a monster shot there. But you're still waiting to see this offense firing at the level that it's capable of. And we know, I never thought this was the best offense in baseball. I don't expect that, but you do expect it to be a top 5 in the American League, or maybe not expect, but it needs to be in that neighborhood. They need to be 5th or 6th. They need to be a consensus top 5, top 6 kind of offense. We know their on-base percentage isn't going to be that good, but are they going to hit home runs? Are they going to hit for power? That part of that aspect of the team, which we know clearly there have been some guys who have underperformed. Now the good news is, we've seen Mark Trumbo really turn it on here over the last 3 or 4 weeks compared to what he was in April, which was basically a 0. We've seen Chris Davis have his stretches. You'd like to see more of those, and you'd like to see those stretches prolonged a little more. Clearly Machado, we've talked about him at length. Adam Jones had a good April, but hasn't been as good there of late, and clearly he was banged up here recently. So you just kind of go down the list. Wellington Castillo has been really good at the plate when he's been healthy, but on the disabled list again. So you go down that list. Really, the only guys you can point to that have been consistent, I would say Jonathan Scope, who hasn't had a fantastic season, but I think he's been rock solid for them, and had a nice day with a couple doubles on Sunday.
And more than that,
again.
sort of consistent. I sort of feel like we know what we're getting out of him right now. He's really kind of emerged. I said that to you the other day. He's going to get himself a lot of money. We're talking about Machado's money. Scope's going to get paid here before it's all over with.
Yeah, he's we know what he is at this point. He's going to hit for a lot of power. He's not going to walk much. Although I will say, to his credit, and it's very relative, he's walking a little bit more this year. It's still not nearly enough, as you'd like to see, but it's really been him. And Mancini has clearly been the big surprise and has been one of their offensive stars, quite frankly. Hasn't been hitting as many home runs lately, but we've seen this kid, kind of hover in that 290, 295 range, 300, after some strong games here recently. So, it's been good to see that from him, but you're still waiting for Trumbo to take off, and I don't expect him to hit 47 home runs, but you're expecting him to hopefully be at least in the mid-30s, if not a few more than that. Same for Davis. Clearly you need a lot more from Machado. So, when you're waiting for some of your big boppers to get going and be more consistent, you kind of get an offense like we've seen. It hasn't been all bad, but it's been very much middle of the road and even slightly below average in some categories. And you couple that with the needs they've had on the pitching side, you kind of look at this team and not to dismiss or to minimize the fact that they lost 13 out of 16 games, but you can look at that and say, well, that was probably the market correction, because we all agreed they weren't really a 22 and 10 caliber club as far as when you just looked at it from an eyeball test standpoint. But all those issues that they've had, considering Gosman's been terrible for the most part until here lately. Tillman clearly hasn't been himself and didn't pitch the first month of the season. They haven't had Zach Britton for most of the season. And you look at them, and they're 3 games above 500. They're 3.5 games out. They're right in the thick of things in the AL East, even with their issues. I think you look at all that collectively and say, you're not going to do cartwheels, but you'd say it could be worse, quite frankly, and you hope that there's still some upside here coming with hopefully Britton coming back here at some point in the next month or so, and some of those guys offensively to get going. And clearly they need to pitch better. That's stating the obvious, and that's nothing new from what we've said over and over the last 5 or 6 years.
What does Chris Davis say about striking out so much? I mean, I looked down and I literally was wondering when I saw 85 strikeouts and less than 200 at-bats. I said, what is the record? And I remember Bobby Bonds struck out a lot a million years ago, and Reggie Jackson, and I could get some Dave Kingman. I know Mark Reynolds, had set a record, but I didn't even know the number. Do you know the number?
The major league record
season
off the top of my head.
You don't, right? I mean, I don't either. I had to look it up.
I thought, didn't Davis set it?
Mark Reynolds, 223 strikeouts in 2009.
Okay.
Adam Dunn, 222 strikeouts in 2012. Chris Davis, 219 strikeouts in 16. Chris Davis is on this list more than anyone. He struck out 199 in 13, 208 in 15. Didn't make the record in 14 because he got suspended.
Right.
And then 219 in 16. Dude, he's on pace to shatter the all-time, literally shatter. I mean, if he got to 240, 245, he would shatter it. And to your point with the whack job that owns this team and who's out on the field and who gets directed and who doesn't, I know for the amount of money they're paying him, he's going to be out there batting in September. I mean, he's going to have a crack at this record if he stays healthy. They're not going to bench him. So knowing all that, what does he say about this? Dude, it's embarrassing. It really is. I mean, I look up and down my Facebook, and so many with the bat on his shoulder.
Well, that to me, that's the issue to me more so than. I mean, Chris Davis strikes out. He struck out a lot when he was 27. I mean, this is why a lot of people did not want to give him a 7-year, $161 million,
including the manager and the general manager, from my sources.
I mean, that's. These types of hitters, Ryan Howard is a perfect example. Ryan Howard was an MVP. He was, at one time, I don't think anyone said he was the best player in baseball, but he was in that conversation.
Well, he struck out 199 times in 07 and 08, and they're like, here, just take the money. He was 27 and 28 years of age at that point, and what do you think you're going to get when he's 35, right?
I mean, these guys don't age well. I mean, they don't. Now, that said, before we just continually crush Chris Davis, it's kind of funny saying that, but he's still he's drawn a lot of walks. I mean, even with a 232 average, his on-base percentage is about 100 points higher than that. It's one of the better on-base percentages on this team. So draws walks, does play very good defense at first base, still hitting home runs. But the strikeouts and the higher whiff rate and the thing that I'm not surprised to see. The thing that's been maddening to me is the strikeouts looking. He's been asked about it. He's flat out acknowledged that he hasn't been seeing the ball well. And, how much of that is, I don't think it's necessarily his eyesight per se, but you get into bad habits. You have a guy who strikes out a lot anyway, and you get into these ruts. The bat speed, you get to the point where you're on the wrong side of 30. As much as, for the longest time, I feel there was a perception that the prime of a player's career was 28, 29, 30, 31. It's really not. It's much younger than that. And more data being out there supports that. He's kind of in that, he's at that point in his career where it's probably not going to get better. Now, that's not to say Chris Davis can't have some productive seasons. I mean, I think he can, and I think he will. And he's still been productive this year. It's not as though he's been a zero because, and me being a sabermetrically inclined kind of guy, the strikeouts are one part of the equation. It's ugly. It's embarrassing, as you put it, and I won't dispute that. The stigma of it is certainly something that is still there, even if maybe not viewed as negatively as 20 years ago.
No one wants to lead the world in strikeouts, for crying out loud.
Sure,
right?
sure. No, but I'm not saying it's okay, but I'll say this. I'm not surprised by this, and this is why, as much as I won't criticize the Orioles for spending money, actually, because the thought of them giving a $161 million contract to someone 4 or 5 years ago, we would have laughed about it, right? We did laugh about it. I mean, I remember you and I talking at the end of 2015, thinking that there was no way that Chris Davis, I think you asked me to give a percent, I thought maybe 10% chance, 15% chance. They spent the money, so, the principle of spending the money, that's great, but as we talked about that off season, and as we'll talk about, and we talked about it with Trumbo this off season, and even though that's not the same steep commitment, that's still a commitment that they made. And having Trey Mancini, you kind of wonder if was Trumbo the best investment? Could they have put Mancini there? They could have re-signed Pedro Alvarez for $2 million and maybe gotten similar production in its totality. But the point is, when you have power hitting guys, these. In Davis's case, three true outcomes: home run, walk, strikeout. They're generally not going to age very well, and this is what we're seeing. And the scary thing is, we're talking about this in 2017. Imagine what we're going to be talking about in 2020, 2021, as far as what the production is going to be then. You just hope, and that's the deal with these 9-figure contracts most of the time. That's why a lot of smarter baseball people than me, nothing to do with the Orioles whatsoever, just in general. That's why they say these deals are bad investments. You hope you get enough production, enough value over the first half of the deal that it makes up for the second half of the deal. It's going to be a loss, and I don't think I'm making a bold proclamation and saying I can't see any way that the second half of this Chris Davis contract isn't a complete loser for the Orioles. You just hope he gives you good enough production over the first 3-4 years of the deal where you say, all right, it's not pretty now, but we at least got some bang for our buck early on. And, that's what most of these $100+ million contracts end up turning out to be.
Well, and we're also waiting on Machado right now, right?
Sure.
I mean, McCutchen's coming into town this week, and I was sort of alarmed to see what's happened to him over the last 18 months. I don't follow the Pirates much. I knew he was down a little bit last year. I didn't even take a gander to check this year. But, you're in a glass house throwing rocks if you're talking about McCutchen with Machado was here. At this point, I think everywhere Machado's going to go, out to New York and to Chicago, hey, dude, you're supposed to be the $300 million guy. You're batting .212, and it's June. What's up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. Look, anyone has slumps. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We talked about Manny did not swing the bat very well last July or, I believe, last September. I think he had a pretty good August, just off the top of my head without the numbers in front of me. But, you go through a stretch and where you struggle early in the season with some bad luck mixed in as well. He went through some periods where he hit the ball really hard, wasn't getting a great return for it. And we've seen periods like here recently, at least until the last few games, where looks like he's starting to come out of it somewhat. That has been striking out more, swinging through more fastballs, which something that I've touched on a bit at WNST.net, where Manny's been a guy from day one, kind of feasted on fastballs, and this year he struggled, striking out, not doing a whole lot with them. How much of that's just getting into bad habits and swinging for the fences, which is something that I think he did a little bit too much the second half of last year to his detriment. I think there's some of that. I think Machado is at his best when he's trying to use the whole field and he's trying to hit line drives. And when he does that, he's still going to hit plenty of home runs because he's a big, strong kid. He is. You look at him now at going to be 25 next month. It's crazy to say he's only going to be 25, but feels like he's been around forever. But you've seen him get stronger. He's clearly a big kid. Was a big kid coming out of high school. But I think you've seen his approach, and I think the thing that impressed me most about him recently, and I even asked him about this on Friday night, it was his home run into the second deck. I just asked him about it because it's only happened a couple times. The Wonder Dog, Rex Hudler did it, Mark Reynolds did it. I don't know if anyone
Juan Gonzalez did it on baked baseballs that were juiced.
Yeah. So it's not something that's been done often. But
he was baked too, by the way, Gonzalez.
Yeah.
There was juice and then juiced, right?
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah. Pretty tough.
That was
to
a
argue
double
that.
juice, yeah.
Yeah, pretty tough to dispute that one based on his incredible Hawks disease.
Hey, Brady Anderson never used. He never did. Now, come on, not on this station. We're not going to talk about that.
But I asked Machado about it, and you know what he said? He said, yeah, it was cool to do that, but it probably messed me up in the rest of my at-bats for the rest of the game. The fact that he made that assessment, that tells me he's going to get himself out of this. We all know Manny Machado is too great of a player to be hovering right around 220 right now. He's going to bust out now. At this point, is he going to have a career-high batting average? Probably not, stating the obvious, but at the end of the year, I'm confident that he's going to have a representative season. And the fact that he made that comment when I asked him just to reflect on the fact that he went second tank, which is pretty impressive to do at Camden Yards, the fact that he had that kind of a mature response, that said something to me as far as a guy that isn't being cavalier about his struggles. He's aware that he's searching for it. And again, you saw him over the weekend. Do some nice things with the bat. Not perfect, but looking like he's starting to get himself out of this thing slowly but surely.
He is Luke Jones. He covers all things Orioles. He's going to get a little down day here. We're going to talk more about Dennis Pitta and Tavon Young and the NBA and Golden State. We'll be doing all of that around here as well. You can find Luke at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. You can always throw him a note. I'm out on the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day. From anywhere in the world on your mobile device, just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear all week from anywhere, when you want, how you want, where you want. It's what we do on the buyatoyota.com Audio Vault. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. That comes every morning. And the texts come, and sometimes they're bad news, like they were on Friday with Pitta and Thursday with Young. We're going to try to get some good news on the WNST text service, but wouldn't hold my breath on that. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. You will always know first. Dennis will be here first on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home with the SSV on WNST. I am a very available individual, just like the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, the managing partner. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.